He was nothing but a skeleton cloaked in black fur, heartlessly tossed from a porch to perish on the cruel ice of a Duluth blizzard. The man who cast him aside branded him as trash, useless, broken. His hind legs were utterly still, and the snow was slowly entombing him alive. No one thought he'd see the dawn, but they hadn't seen the Marine watching from the shadows, or the loyal war dog standing at his side. They didn't know that inside that tiny, shattered body there beat the heart of an emperor. Their story will move you to tears and prove that what is broken can be healed stronger. Before this story unfolds, let us feel your presence. Tell us what country you are watching from below. And if you believe every soul deserves a fighting chance, subscribe now, because this story, right here, this one might just restore your faith in miracles. The wind howling off Lake Superior wasn't just blowing, it hunted. It ripped through the streets of Duluth like a savage beast, seeking any crack in the city's armor, any small gap in a coat, any exposed piece of skin to sear with a cold like burning iron. This was a Tuesday evening in the heart of January, and the city itself was vanishing. The streetlights had become just hazy, distant smudges, drowning pools of amber light in a swirling ocean of white. Most folks in Minnesota knew better than to be out in it, retreating to the warmth of their homes and the safety of locked doors. But Logan Vance wasn't most people. Not Logan. A 34-year-old man, seemingly carved from silence and hard muscle, he walked with a stride that cut straight through the drifts. He wore a heavy canvas jacket, weathered and worn, its collar pulled up tight against the punishing gale, and a faded beanie pulled low, shadowing eyes, the color of steel wool gray alert, and holding a weight that aged him beyond his years. He was a former U.S. Marine, a man who'd faced the harsh glare of the desert, and now sought a quiet solace in the ice. Logan didn't mind the cold. The cold was honest. It never lied to you, and it never pretended to be your friend. At his heel, tethered more by an invisible bond than the slack leather leash in Logan's hand, walked Major. Major was 5 years old, a German shepherd of impressive size and a truly regal presence. His coat, a rich tapestry of black and deep tan, was dusted with snow like powdered sugar. His movements held the fluid grace of a wolf. With his head held high, his ears pivoted like radar catching sounds the wind attempted to steal. Major was more than just a pet. He was Logan's shadow, his anchor to the present moment. He was the only soul alive who understood the rhythm of Logan's nightmares without a word. "Easy, boy." Logan rumbled, his voice swallowed by the wind. "Almost home?" They were cutting through the back alleys of the city's older, forgotten district, where weathered wooden houses stood shoulder to shoulder against the storm. Snow crunched loudly beneath Logan's heavy boots, a stark percussion against the wind's howl. He preferred the alleys. There were fewer people here, fewer forced smiles, fewer questions about where he'd been or why he returned to Duluth all alone. As they approached the property of Silas Grout, the very air seemed to shift. Silas was a man the neighborhood tolerated with one heavy collective sigh. He was a 50-year-old ruin of a man perpetually flushed from cheap whiskey, his face a road map of broken veins and deep-seated bitterness. The house stood out a blight on the block. Its porch drooped in defeat. The lawn a wasteland of corroded steel and forgotten things. Major halted. But this wasn't a mere pause. He became utterly still, his entire frame a sculpture of raw, vigilant muscle. A deep vibration began to hum in his core. Not a bark, but a threatening growl that telegraphed itself up the leash into Logan's very palm. Logan froze on the spot. "What is it, boy?" Then the sound reached him. It wasn't the howl of the wind. It was a piercing, jagged crack of breaking glass, then a voice like stones scraping together echoed. "Useless. Get out of here." "Get the hell out!" The roar erupted from Silas Grout's porch. Peering through the dense, swirling veil of snow, Logan could make out the sickly yellow flicker of the porch light. A man's silhouette stood unsteadily swaying in the gloom, gripping the railing with one hand while brandishing something in the other. Logan advanced his footsteps, now muffled by the fresh powder. The Marine within him surfaced that part of his mind that instantly assesses threats, calculates trajectories, and silences all fear. He slipped into the shadows of a detached garage, observing. "You want to eat, you earn it." Silas's slurred voice boomed into the night. Logan narrowed his eyes against the biting ice. There at Silas's feet, cowering by a heap of worn-out tires, was a tiny dark form. A German shepherd pup, surely no older than a few months and utterly terrified. Yet it bore no resemblance to the proud creature at Logan's side. This poor thing was a skeleton cloaked in drab, matted fur. It trembled so violently the snow around it quivered. "Please," Logan breathed a prayer sent to a heaven he'd long since abandoned. "Don't do it." But a drunk man's cruelty defies all reason. Silas lunged. He didn't just shove the puppy with his foot. He drew back a leg weighted by a heavy winter boot and delivered a kick fueled by the full force of his drunken fury. The impact was a sickening, wet thud that made Logan's stomach churn. The tiny pup didn't even have the air to cry out. It was launched from the porch as if weightless a rag doll flung by a cruel child. The small body soared through the air, arching over the railing before landing with a crack on the frozen concrete below. It struck the ground and lay utterly still. Time itself seemed to shatter. The wind screamed, but all Logan heard was silence. He saw only the small, dark heap against the white snow. He saw a dark trickle of blood begin to stain the pure white snow by the puppy's muzzle. A hot, white rage ignited deep in Logan's soul. The kind of fury he thought he'd buried in the desert sands. The kind that makes hands tremble and vision narrow. But he did not charge. Not yet. Hard-won discipline drilled deep into his bones held him fast. "Evidence," a voice commanded in his mind. "Secure the objective." With a steady hand that betrayed the fire in his veins, Logan drew his phone from his jacket. He tapped the camera icon, then immediately switched the mode to video, and emerged from the darkness. "That's enough, Silas." Logan's voice wasn't loud, but it sliced through the raging storm like a razor. On the porch, Silas whirled around, stumbling. He peered into the night, his eyes vacant, glassy, and streaked with red. He was clutching a half-empty bottle of amber liquid. Who's there?" Silas stammered his words thick and slurred, spitting into the biting wind. "Get off my damn property." "I'm recording this, Silas," Logan stated, advancing on the porch, his phone held high. "I saw everything you did. It's all on video. It's over." Silas sneered, his face twisting into a mask of ugly false courage. "He's my dog. I do what I want, unless you want to end up just like him." Silas lurched down the first icy step, hoisting the bottle like a crude weapon. "You think you're some kind of hero?" But the growl that tore from Major's chest was ancient. It was the sound of the wild, a chilling promise from a predator that intimately understood the mechanics of death. Major moved between Logan and the threat, the fur along his powerful spine, bristling into a razor's unforgiving edge. His lips curled back, baring teeth that flashed like bone in the lamplight. There was no frantic lunge, no panicked bark. He held his ground, a fortress of disciplined fury, an unspoken challenge for the man to advance. And Silas froze. The drunken flush fled his face as the bottle in his hand dipped. This was the chasm between a coward and a war dog, a divide Silas had no courage to cross. "Get that damn beast away from me," Silas sputtered, scrambling backward up the treacherous steps of his porch. "He stays on my command," Logan replied, his voice a blade of ice honed with pure, undiluted contempt. "Which is more than I can say for you." Logan held his gaze for a beat longer, his camera capturing it all, sealing Silas's cowardly retreat on video. Then the phone vanished, and Logan fell to his knees in the biting snow. My God, the pup was so small. Seeing it up close, it broke something in Logan that war never could. The fragile cage of its ribs strained with each shallow, hitching breath, its tiny legs twisted at impossible angles. A trickle of blood from its nose froze into crimson ice in the frigid air. "Hey there, little guy," Logan breathed. He pulled off his thick gloves. Those calloused, war-torn hands became impossibly tender as he reached for the puppy's neck, searching. He found the pulse a frantic, fading whisper of life. The puppy's eyes were sealed shut, but at his touch, its small body trembled, bracing for more pain. "I've got you," Logan promised softly. "It's okay, you are not trash. Do you hear me? You matter." Major lowered his massive head gently, nudging the broken little body, and letting out a soft, mournful whine. The fearsome guardian had vanished, replaced by a gentle soul filled with a deep and profound sorrow. He tenderly licked the frozen blood from the puppy's ear, an apology for the cruelty of men. "He's a goner anyway," Silas shouted from the safety of his porch, his voice thin and hollow now. "Just save yourself the trouble." Logan slowly raised his head. The look he leveled at Silas was colder than the grave, a stare of pure final judgment. "If this puppy dies," Logan said, his voice a low whisper that cut through the unrelenting wind, "you and I will have the conversation that you won't ever forget." He didn't wait for a single response. With infinite care, Logan gathered the puppy into his arms. It was terrifyingly light, like a fragile bundle of twigs. He unzipped his heavy coat and gently settled the puppy inside against the steady warmth of his own body, creating a shield against the wind's assault. "Let's go, Major, now!" They turned from that house of despair and began to move. It was a desperate, forced march against the clock. The wind howled, fighting to drive them back to that awful place. But Logan pushed forward, feeling the tiny, frantic heartbeat against his own chest. It was a panicked, fading rhythm, a desperate code for help that Logan vowed he would not let go unanswered. Thump, thump, silence, thump. He had to reach the truck. He had to make it to the clinic. The storm was intensifying, the world collapsing into a swirling maelstrom of white. But Logan Vance was numb to the cold's brutal sting. All he felt was the fragile weight inside his coat, and a searing promise that this would not be the end. The engine of his old Ford pickup thundered to life, a mechanical beast stirring in the heart of the tempest. The heater coughed out air that was still more cold than warm, smelling of dust and old oil fighting the Arctic draft that bled through the seals. The cab was a trembling capsule of amber light blasting through a tunnel of white chaos. Logan slammed the gears with a force that made the transmission cry out. The tires whined on the ice, screaming for a grip before finally digging into the pavement and catapulting the truck ahead. He barely glanced at the road. His gaze darted from the churning snow ahead to the passenger seat. That seat was now a battleground, and on it, Major the magnificent German Shepherd had curled his powerful frame onto the bench. He was a being of pure instinct and primal wisdom. Without a single command, he had wrapped himself around the shattered puppy, a living shield, a furnace of fur. He laid his heavy head softly over the tiny flank, his golden eyes wide, unblinking, and locked on Logan. Logan steered with his left hand, knuckles bone white, fighting the wheel as the wind tried to hurl the truck into the ditch. His right hand was deep in the puppy's fur. "Come on," Logan rasped, his voice raw. "Don't you dare quit on me, you hear me? You don't get to quit." His hand began a frantic, rhythmic massage over the little rib cage. Rub, press, release. Rub, press, release. A desperate, one-handed effort to keep the blood moving, to remind that tiny heart it still had a mission. Beneath his palm, the pup felt horrifyingly fragile, like a bird of hollow bones and rain-soaked feathers. The warmth from Major's body was the only thing keeping the little one from freezing solid. But the cold deep inside the puppy, the chill of shock and trauma, was a different kind of foe. The road ahead was an indistinct smudge. The wipers thrashed back and forth, waging a losing battle against the thick, wet snow. Every shadow morphed into a deer. Every drift became a solid wall. But Logan refused to slow. He couldn't afford to. Stopping for proper CPR meant the cab would go cold. Stopping meant the snow could swallow them whole. Stopping meant the silence would finally find them. "Breathe!" Logan roared the word ripping from his throat. "That is a direct order, Marine. Breathe." The command echoed off the truck's steel frame, hollow and desperate. And in that instant, the truck was no longer a truck. For one heart-stopping second, the whine of the tires on the ice shifted pitch. In Logan's mind, it became the thumping, rhythmic whoomp-whoomp of a medevac helicopter rotor. The scent of wet fur and engine dust evaporated, replaced by the metallic tang of blood and the acrid sting of jet fuel. Kandahar 7 years ago. He wasn't holding a puppy, he was holding Corporal Miller. Miller just 19 with a laugh that could fill an entire mess hall. Miller, who'd taken a sniper round to the chest. Logan was shoving his hands into the wound, the blood slick and hot, trying to hold life inside a body that was leaking it away too fast. "Stay with me, Miller. That was an order. Look at me." As the chopper bay's red light pulsed Miller's blue eyes raw with terror, locked onto Logan's. He fought to speak, to utter a name his mother's, maybe a sweetheart waiting back home, but only a crimson bubble formed on his lips. And then the light behind his eyes simply went out. The weight in Logan's arms transformed, shifting from a man to a thing, a hollow, heavy absence. The crushing helplessness of that moment, the unbearable weight of his failure hit Logan now with the force of a physical blow. It was the very same cold, the same desperate race against a clock he could never see. "No!" Logan snarled, shaking the phantom rotor wash from his mind. "Not this time. Not tonight." He pressed with more force on the tiny chest. The puppy's head lolled lifelessly with the truck's sway, as limp as a forgotten doll. Major felt the surge of desperation in Logan. The great dog let out a sharp, piercing whine, a sound of pure distress that cut through the engine's deep roar. Major raised his head and started licking the puppy's face. It wasn't a gentle cleaning. His licks were frantic, his coarse tongue scraping the little muzzle with a fierce intensity, clearing the dried blood, trying to force a reaction to will the dead back to life. "Wake him up, Major!" Logan choked the tears he hadn't known were there, now blurring the road ahead. "You wake him up." The truck suddenly hit a slick of black ice. The rear end whipped violently to the right. Logan didn't flinch. His training took over. He steered into the skid, eased off the accelerator, correcting the slide, with a precision honed over years of driving through conditions far worse than this. The truck righted itself, but the sudden jolt knocked his hand from the puppy's chest. He reached back instantly, his fingers searching for that faint, fluttering pulse of life. Nothing. A cold dread seized Logan. His hand lay still against the tiny ribcage. There was no breath, no rise and fall. Just an absolute, profound stillness. He glanced down. The dashboard's eerie green glow cast a ghostly light across the passenger seat. The puppy's mouth hung slightly open, its tongue lolling out. It was a dark, bruised purple, the unmistakable color of death. "No!" Logan screamed. He slammed his fist onto the steering wheel, the crack echoing like a gunshot in the small cab. "Don't you do this to me. Don't you dare die on me." The grief was a sudden tidal wave pulling him under. It wasn't just about a puppy. It was Miller. It was every single failure, every loss, every time he'd been strong enough to fight, but not strong enough to save a life. It was the universe confirming his curse that everything he dared to care for would turn to dust. But Major refused to surrender. As Logan was drowning in his past, the dog was acting on pure, unwavering love. Major scrambled forward, his big paws bracketing the small, broken body. He shoved his nose deep into the puppy's neck, nudging hard, pushing the little head aside. He let out one sharp, powerful bark. Woof, directly into the pup's ear, then immediately went back to licking, focusing on the nose and mouth. "Come back," the loyal dog seemed to plead. "Come back to us. Come back to the pack." Logan just watched, his breath frozen in his lungs, his own hand hovering useless in the air. And then a miracle unfolded. A tremor ran through the small, broken body. It began in the hind legs, a tiny flicker of nerves, then rippled up the spine. The puppy's chest suddenly hitched. A cough. It was a wet, terrible sound, a gurgle of fluid and air. But to Logan Vance, it was the most beautiful symphony he had ever heard. The tiny body shuddered violently. A second cough, more powerful now, forced out a pinkish froth. Then came a gasp, a desperate, broken breath. A frantic inhale flooded its bruised lungs with precious air. Its purple tongue drew back. The ribcage swelled against Major's protective coat. Thump, thump, thump. The rhythm returned. Faint, unsteady, but present. "Good boy," Logan whispered, his voice cracking. The words fractured into a sob. "That's a good boy." He reached a hand over, stroking the fur on Major's head. His fingers sank deep into the coarse fur of the older dog's neck. Major looked up, his tail giving one exhausted thump against the worn seat upholstery. He remained steadfast. He settled his head back over the small pup, a heavy, protective presence watching over him, as if anchoring the fragile life to this world. The city lights started to fade as they drove toward the edge of town. The darkness of the country road to the vet clinic took over. But up ahead, cutting through the driving snow, Logan saw it, a blue sign reflecting in his headlights. Maple Ridge Veterinary Clinic. He was more than a man in a truck now. He was a guardian tasked with delivering a precious life. The desert ghosts retreated once more into the shadows, silenced for this one night by the steady, fighting breath of a puppy that refused to let go of life. The doors to the Maple Ridge Veterinary Clinic flew open, thrown wide, not by the storm, but by the raw desperation of a man on a mission. Logan Vance staggered inside the reception area, the small bell over the door chiming frantically in his wake. A cheerful ring that was a stark contrast to the bloodstains on his jacket and the fading life he held in his arms. The clinic felt warm. It smelled of antiseptic and lemon polish, a jarring change from the blizzard's howling white abyss just outside. The silence was immediately broken. "Help!" Logan's voice was shredded, a sound ripped from a throat worn raw by screaming against the relentless wind. "I need a doctor right now." From behind the reception desk, a young veterinary technician's head snapped up. Her eyes grew wide, taking in the huge man and the enormous German shepherd standing beside him like a wolf protecting its fallen king. Yet before she could even speak, the double doors to the treatment area swung open. It was Dr. Elena Ross stepped through. She looked as if she were carved from the same resilient timber of the northern woods in her late 30s, with dark hair tied back in a stern, practical ponytail and eyes that shone like polished amber. She moved with a practiced efficiency that Logan knew instantly. It was the focused movement of a combat medic in the field, someone who didn't waste a single motion on panic. The blue scrubs she wore had clearly seen a very long shift, and a stethoscope was draped around her neck, her badge of office. She asked no questions. She didn't ask about payment. Her eyes immediately locked onto the small bundle in Logan's arms. "Room 1, she ordered, her tone calm but sharp. "In here quickly." Logan obeyed, his boots leaving a trail of wet, muddy tracks on the spotless linoleum. Major trotted closely beside him, his nose nearly attached to Logan's leg, unwilling to be separated from his pack. Inside the brightly lit examination room, the light was intensely bright, eliminating all shadows. Logan gently placed the puppy on the stainless steel table. The surface was cold, but Elena had already snapped a warming blanket across it. She moved just like a whirlwind. Her hands, sheathed in blue latex, moved swiftly over the puppy's still body. She checked his gums, pale, nearly white. She pressed her stethoscope to his tiny chest, tuning into the frantic, fluid rhythm of a heart giving out. "What happened?" she asked, her gaze never wavering. "Kicked!" Logan rasped, his voice raw, thrown with full force from a porch onto solid concrete. Elena's jaw clenched, a small muscle pulsing in her cheek. It was the only trace of anger she allowed. How long ago? 20 minutes, maybe 30. He stopped breathing in the truck. I brought him back. But Elena was already removing the stethoscope, her eyes locking with Logan's. Those amber eyes were like stone, offering no false comfort. He has a tension pneumothorax. His lungs are collapsing and filling with fluid. His body temperature is critical, and he's bleeding internally. She paused, her gaze falling on the tiny, broken form that was barely a ripple under the warming blanket. If I don't go into surgery this instant to stop the bleeding and drain his chest, he will be gone in 10 minutes. The words hung in the silence, heavy and final. Do it, Logan said. Do whatever you have to. Elena gave a sharp nod to the technician who had come in with them. Prep for an emergency thoracotomy. Get me 2 units of O-negative plasma and prepare the anesthesia induction. Only then did she turn to Logan, her expression softening by a fraction, the commander melting into the healer. You need to wait outside, Logan. I have to maintain a sterile field. Joe, you can watch from the observation window, but you cannot be in here. I'm not leaving him. Logan began, his protective instinct flaring. You aren't, Elena said firmly, placing a hand on his arm. Her grip held a surprising, unyielding strength. You are letting me save him. Now go. Logan hesitated, then gave a sharp nod. He commanded Major, heal, and they retreated to the hallway, separated from the battlefield by a simple wall of glass and drywall. The lights out here were dimmer, a low fluorescent hum that felt like dusk compared to the blinding supernova of the operating room. Logan collapsed onto a hard plastic bench across from the observation glass. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, lacing his hands together so tightly that his knuckles shone white. He glanced down at his jacket. A smear of blood was near the zipper, dark and already drying. It wasn't his. It was the blood of an innocent. And so the waiting began. For a soldier, waiting is a special kind of torture. It's the hurry up and wait of deployment, the deafening silence just before the ambush, the agonizing eternity between the call for a medevac and the first beat of rotors. But this was different. There was no enemy here to fight. There was no perimeter to hold. There was only a glass window and a woman waging a silent war against death and trauma. Major could not find peace. The massive dog paced the length of the narrow hall, his claws a constant rhythmic clicking on the tile. Click, 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 a turn, then click, click, click again. He padded to the door of the OR and pressed his wet nose into the seam, inhaling deeply, desperately searching for the little one's scent. He let out a low, mournful whine, a sound that vibrated from his soul, filled with a deep confusion that shattered Logan's heart. Major had seen death before. He had been with Logan when brothers didn't come home. But this was a puppy, a part of their pack, a baby. To a wolf, to lose a pup is to fail the pack. Major, Logan whispered, his voice thick. Come here, boy. The dog moved to him instantly, shoving his heavy head under Logan's hand, desperate for reassurance. But Logan had none he could give. He buried his fingers in the dense fur, feeling the dog's coiled tension. Major was trembling, a fine, high-strung vibration that resonated with the tremors in Logan's very own soul. 2 old soldiers terrified of losing their recruit. Beyond the glass, Logan watched the silent, intense ballet of the operation. Elena was transformed. Poised above the table, masked and focused, only her determined eyes showed as she worked with terrifying speed. Instruments flashed under the lights. Scalpels, clamps, and suction tubes already running crimson with fluid. The technician mirrored her every move, handing her tools before she could even ask. They had opened the puppy's chest. Logan flinched, his gaze breaking away for a heartbeat before he willed himself to look back. He owed this small warrior his witness. He saw Elena's hands deep in the small cavity, mending, stitching, and tying off vessels leaking life away. Time itself seemed to melt away. It could have been minutes or hours. The storm outside raged on, pounding the clinic walls, a distant, muffled fury. But inside, their whole world had shrunk to the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Beep! 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 The sound was faint, unsteady. But it was the one thread of hope that anchored Logan to the earth. And then the rhythm broke. Beep, 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 beep. Through the glass, Logan watched Elena go still, her head jerking toward the monitor. The technician uttered something, panic seizing her form. And then came the sound that every warrior, every healer, every parent dreads above all else in the world. A single unending tone, the flat line, that solitary high-pitched scream of a life extinguishing. In the hall, Logan shot to his feet, the bench screeching against the wall. He slammed his palms against the glass. No. Inside the room, controlled chaos erupted into cardiac arrest. Elena's voice, though muffled by the glass, carried a piercing urgency. He's in hypovolemic shock. Paddles are no good, he's too small. Get me the epinephrine now. The technician's hands trembled as she drew the clear fluid. Elena was not waiting. She seized the syringe, and with a motion that seemed reckless, but was guided by absolute surgical precision, she plunged the needle straight through the chest wall, directly into the heart. Come on, she snarled, casting the syringe aside. She didn't turn to a machine. She turned to the puppy. Cupping her hands around the fragile torso, she positioned her thumbs. She began manual heart compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her thumbs sank deep into the delicate rib cage, by sheer force commanding the blood to flow, commanding the heart that it was not allowed to stop. It was a raw, intimate act of defiance against death. She was physically forcing life back into him. Logan pressed his forehead to the cold glass, his eyes stinging, his breath clouding the pain. He felt helpless, utterly and completely powerless. This was an enemy he couldn't shoot, a foe he couldn't outrun. Fight. He breathed a prayer sent to any god who might be listening. Fight, little guy. You didn't come this far just to die on this table. And somehow Major sensed the change. His frantic pacing ceased. The dog came to Logan's side, rising up on his hind legs to place his front paws against the glass. He peered into the operating room, ears pinned, flat tail tucked low. He let out a single sharp bark that cut right through the glass. A command. Wake up! Elena was drenched now. Sweat streamed down her forehead, disappearing into her surgical cap. Her thumbs worked in a cadence of pure, furious will. I am not losing you, she growled at the tiny body. Not on my watch. Give me a beat, just one beat. The monitor shrieked its monotonous, lethal tone. Come on, baby. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, an entire lifetime. Elena stopped her hands, pulling back as she stared at the screen, her chest heaving. Silence. Logan's own heart seemed to stop with the machine. His world bled to gray as he saw the small, still form on the table. The wires, the tubes, the blood. It was over. The brutal cold had won. Silus had won. Then Elena grabbed the puppy once more. No! She yelled, resuming compressions with a desperate force fueled by a defiant refusal to lose. Beep, damn you, beep! And then, on the monitor's green line, a single spike rose like a defiant mountain. Beep! Logan gasped for air, dragging it into his lungs as if he had been the one to nearly drown. Elena froze her hands, hovering above the tiny chest. Beep, another spike. Stronger. Beep, beep, beep. The rhythm was back. It was a frantic, chaotic drum solo of panic, but it was a rhythm. It was life. Inside the room, Elena's body went limp, her shoulders slumping as the immense tension finally left her. She looked up at the glass, her gaze locking with Logan's. Her mask hid her mouth, but her amber eyes were crinkled at the corners in a weary smile. She nodded just once, a sharp, definitive nod. He's back, asterisk. Logan's legs gave out and he slid down the wall, collapsing to the floor in a heap. He ignored the cold of the tile and buried his face in his hands. He was shaking violently, a tremor that started deep in his chest and radiated out to his very fingertips. Major was on him, instantly shoving his wet nose into Logan's ear, licking the side of his face, a soft, worried whine in his throat. He made it, boy, Logan choked out. wrapping an arm around the dog's powerful neck, pulling him close. He made it. The beeping continued steady and strong, a lullaby of survival in the hushed clinic. The storm outside still raged, burying Duth in ice. But inside that hallway, the ice in Logan's soul began to melt, replaced by a warmth that felt dangerously wonderfully like hope. The storm outside had spent its fury, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt heavy. The town of Duth lay buried under 2 feet of fresh snow, a city held captive in the white, frozen palm of winter. But inside the recovery room of the Maple Ridge Veterinary Clinic, the air was alive with the gentle hum of machinery, a modern lullaby of survival. The ICU was dim, lit only by the soft, rhythmic glow of monitors and the pale blue aura of the oxygen incubator. It was a place that existed outside of time, a quiet sanctuary between the world's violence and the peace of healing. Logan Vance sat on a folding metal chair, his body contorted into a painful hunch he didn't even notice. He had scrubbed the blood from his hands in the bathroom sink, but he could still feel the phantom warmth of it against his skin. His jacket lay in a heap in the corner, serving as a makeshift bed for Major, though the Great Shepherd refused to sleep. Major lay with his chin resting on his paws, his amber eyes fixed unblinkingly on the glass box where the little one lay. And inside that box, tangled in a web of IV lines and warming pads, was the small, broken creature that had almost been lost forever an hour ago. The puppy's tiny chest was wrapped in thick bandages. A tube ran from his nose. He looked less like a dog and more like a wounded prayer. The door to the ICU creaked open. Dr. Elena Ross stepped in the harsh hallway light, cutting a sharp wedge into the room's soft twilight. She carried 2 mugs, steam rising from them. She looked completely different now. The surgical mask was gone, revealing a face etched with fatigue, but softened by the profound weight of relief. She'd changed from blood-stained scrubs into a clean navy blue set dark wisps of her hair, now escaping the tight ponytail she'd worn. Without a word, she crossed the room and held a mug out to Logan. "Black," she whispered. "Figured you weren't a sugar guy." Logan looked up, blinking as if pulled from a deep trance. He accepted the mug, its warmth seeping into his stiff, cold fingers. "You figured right. Thank you, Doctor." "Call me Elena," she replied, sliding a stool from the corner and sitting at a respectful distance. She took a sip from her own coffee, her eyes closing for a moment as the caffeine began to take hold. "He's stable. His pressure is rising. The chest drain is doing its job." Logan just nodded, his gaze returning to the incubator. "He looks so small." "He is," Elena agreed gently. "But he has the heart of a lion. Most dogs wouldn't have made it through the initial trauma, much less the surgery. He wants to be here." They sat in a shared silence. The only sounds the steady, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor and the quiet bubbling of the oxygen tank. It was a comfortable quiet, the kind shared between 2 soldiers after a battle. "Does he have a name?" Elena asked, her finger tracing the rim of her mug. "I need something for his chart besides puppy dough." Logan's eyes were fixed on the dog. His mind replayed the image of the bruised, broken creature Silas had brutally kicked off that porch. He saw a victim, but watching the steady rise and fall of that tiny chest, Logan no longer saw a victim. He saw a conqueror. He saw a fighter that had stared into the darkness and refused to back down. "Kaiser," Logan said, the name forming on his lips before he was even conscious of choosing it. Elena tilted her head. "Kaiser, it means emperor," Logan explained, his voice thick with emotion, "or ruler, because from this moment on he rules his own destiny. No one hurts him again. No one owns him but himself." A true smile transformed Elena's face, a genuine and sudden warmth. The exhaustion in her eyes vanished, replaced by a soft crinkle. "Kaiser, that's a powerful name for such a little guy. He'll grow into it." "He will," Logan stated. It wasn't hope in his voice. It was a promise. Elena finished her coffee and rose to her feet, giving the IV pump's fluid levels one final check. I'll be in my office with paperwork. I'll check him hourly. Try and get some rest. Logan, the adrenaline is going to wear off and you'll crash hard. I'm fine, Logan lied. Her gaze held his. She truly saw him with eyes that understood far too much. You saved his life. The surgery was part of it, but you brought him back on that road. Don't you ever forget that. And with that, she left the door clicking softly shut, leaving Logan alone with his demons and his dog. The silence fell once more, but it felt different now. It was heavier, filled with the promise of the name Kaiser. Logan leaned in, pressing his forehead against the cool plexiglass of the incubator. A silent vigil. He watched his breath cloud the barrier between them in a small fog. You hear that, Kaiser? He whispered. You have a name now. You're not just some stray. Major rose to his feet, his claws clicking softly on the linoleum floor. He padded over gently, wedging his massive head between Logan's knees and the incubator's stand. He let out a low, plaintive whine, nudging Logan's hand with his wet nose. Logan's hand fell to scratch behind Major's ears, but his gaze remained locked on the puppy. I know, boy, Logan murmured to Major. I know. He looked back at Kaiser, and the emotional dam inside him began to crack. The wall he'd forged from discipline and silence since coming home from the desert began to fracture. I know how that feels, Logan breathed to the sleeping puppy, his voice a ghost in the air. To be discarded, to feel shattered while the world just walks on by. He remembered the day he was sent home, the cold handshake, the medal, the flight back to a city that looked the same, but felt foreign. He remembered the nights he'd wake up drenched in sweat, reaching for a phantom rifle. The gut-wrenching feeling that the best part of him, the part that mattered, was buried in the sand, and all that came back was an empty shell. Silas had called the puppy useless. That one word had sliced into Logan deeper than any blade. They see scars, and they just see damage, Logan went on, his voice thick with emotion. But they're wrong. Scars mean you made it through. Scars are armor. He gently traced the shape of the puppy's bandaged leg on the incubator glass. You're not trash, Kaiser. You're the toughest little soul in this whole city tonight. And I promise you, I swear it. As long as I am breathing, you will never be cold again. You will never go hungry. And you will never ever be alone. It was both a confession and a prayer offered to a dog who couldn't possibly hear him, but truly intended for the man who desperately needed to speak the words. Saving Kaiser wasn't just about the dog. It was about proving that broken things could be fixed, that they were still worth saving. Abruptly, the quiet rhythm of the room shattered. A soft, choking sound came from the incubator. Logan went rigid. Kaiser. The puppy's small legs began to convulse. His head thrashed from side to side, striking the padding. A high, thin whine, sharp as a needle, sliced through the air. The heart monitor screamed. Beep, 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 beep. The green line became a frantic, jagged peak. Pain or a nightmare or both. So, easy. Logan pleaded, panic clawing at his throat. Easy, buddy. But Kaiser was lost in the darkness. His eyes squeezed tightly shut, his mouth agape in a silent scream. Tiny paws clawing at the blanket, as if desperate to escape the boot that had shattered him. He was reliving at the porch the fall. Major didn't wait for a command. The big shepherd rose up on his hind legs, placing his front paws on the metal stand of the incubator. He pressed his nose firmly against the ventilation holes in the plexiglass and let out a single sharp bark. Woof! But Kaiser's thrashing only grew more violent. Tangling himself in the IV line, Logan knew he shouldn't open the incubator, the sterile temperature, the oxygen levels, but he couldn't just stand by and watch the puppy tear himself apart. He unlatched the side port, a small circular opening made for hands. He reached inside. The air was warm and moist. Logan's large, scarred hand gently enveloped the puppy's trembling little body. He didn't try to restrain him. He just held him. He laid his palm flat over the tiny, frantic heart, grounding the chaos. "I've got you," Logan murmured, his voice dropping low, finding that deep, steady tone that Major always answered to. "Dad's here. Major is here. You're safe." "Dad?" He hadn't meant to say the word, but it hung there, heavy and real. Major pressed his muzzle into the opening around Logan's arm, his tongue reaching out to lick the puppy's side, offering the primal comfort of the pack. "You feel that?" Logan soothed, stroking the velvety ears with his thumb. "That's your brother. We're right here with you. No one can hurt you now. The bad man is gone." Kaiser let out a long, shuddering sob. It was a cry so achingly human it stung Logan's eyes. But beneath the steady weight of his hand, the frantic struggling began to cease. The tiny pup turned his head, a blind search for warmth, and his nose nudged softly against Logan's wrist. He took a trembling, wet sniff, breathing in the scent of the man who saved him from the storm tobacco-worn leather, and the smell of safety itself. The monitor's frantic pace slowed. Beep, beep, beep! The jagged green line softened. Kaiser's breaths deepened, catching just once, then twice before settling into the deep rhythm of exhausted sleep. He rested his small chin on Logan's palm, making a pillow of the man's hand, anchoring himself to the one solid thing in his fragile world. Logan never moved his hand. He remained right there, hunched in an awkward crouch, his arm reaching into the machine, a lifeline to the small soul he had pulled from the blinding snow. Major lowered himself back to all fours, yet kept his chin resting on the metal stand, his own weary eyes closing ever so slowly, at last permitting himself to rest now that the worst was over. In the stillness of the ICU, bathed in the cool blue glow of the monitors, a family was forged not of blood, but of a stubborn shared refusal to surrender. The sun crested over Duth, not as a gentle dawn, but as a blinding revelation. The blizzard had scoured the sky clean, leaving a dome of impossibly sharp crystalline blue in its wake. Outside the walls of the Maple Ridge Veterinary Clinic, the world was a breathtaking sculpture of white, profound silence. Cars were entombed in drifts resembling sleeping polar bears. Trees were sheathed in diamond-like armor, and the air was so crisp it tasted of iron and absolute purity. Inside the clinic, the morning shift moved with the hushed, careful efficiency of a true sanctuary. Logan Vance stood before the reception counter, his frame stiff, his eyes gritty from a night without sleep yet strikingly clear. Facing him was Officer Jim Miller, a man built like a solid vending machine, broad-shouldered and undeniably square, with a face that seemed carved from granite, only to be softened by years of witnessing the city's darkest corners. He wore his uniform with the easy confidence of a veteran, snow melting from his heavy-duty boots onto the welcome mat. "We got him," Miller said, his voice a low rumble that echoed the morning's gravity. "Silas Groud is officially in custody." "Arraignment set for high noon." Logan simply nodded, handing the officer his phone. "The video's in the gallery. You'll see everything. The yelling, the brutal kick, all of it." Miller accepted the device, his thick fingers swiping the screen with an unexpected delicacy. He watched the recording in stoic silence, his jaw clenched, a single muscle twitching beneath the dark stubble on his cheek. He never once looked away. The sickening sound of the puppy hitting the pavement caused the receptionist behind him to physically flinch. "That's hard to watch," Miller murmured, handing the phone back. "But it is exactly what the district attorney needs. This plus, Doctor, Ross's medical report detailing the full extent of the injuries. He's not getting off with just a fine. This is a felony charge. Aggravated cruelty." "Good," Logan replied, the word landing flat and heavy. "He called that little dog trash." Miller met Logan's gaze, and for a fleeting moment the badge and uniform vanished, leaving just two men standing in the wake of senseless violence. "He's the only piece of trash in this equation, Mr. Vance. We will take it from here. You just focus on that little guy." As Miller turned to go, the heavy glass door hissed shut behind him with a seal of grim finality, and Logan felt a strange, lingering hollowness. Justice was in fact being served, The monster was now in a cage, but justice was just a concept written on paper and argued in cold courtrooms. It couldn't mend a lung. It couldn't warm a freezing body. It couldn't make a terrified, broken puppy choose to eat. The real fight was still raging in the back. Logan moved deliberately toward the treatment area, Major at his side, a shadow matching his every step. The shepherd felt the change in the air. The danger outside had passed, but a new one, a quieter one, lingered inside. In the small kennel, Dr. Elena Ross was fighting a war she was losing. Kaiser was awake. He was out of the incubator, curled on a soft nest of towels inside a floor-level cage. He looked so fragile, so small against the sterile white. A vest of white bandages wrapped his tiny ribs, and his dark, wet eyes darted around the room with the desperate energy of a caged bird. Elena knelt in front of his cage, holding a plastic syringe filled with a thick, creamy liquid, a high-calorie supplement. "Come on, little one," she whispered, her voice soft and encouraging. "Just a tiny taste. You need your strength." She moved the syringe slowly toward his mouth. Kaiser flinched away, scrambling backward in panic, his claws finding no purchase on the soft towels as he pressed himself into the far corner. A sharp, guttural whimper escaped his throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. That kick did more than just break his bones. It had bruised his throat and completely shattered his trust. In his mind, the syringe wasn't sustenance. It was just another strange object, another weapon being forced on him by these giants. "He just won't take it." Elena sighed, her shoulders slumping as she lowered the syringe. Exhausted, she pushed a stray hair from her face with her wrist. "His throat is too swollen, it hurts him to swallow, and psychologically." "Went and treat." He's terrified of anything moving toward his face. Logan entered the enclosure and sat cross-legged on the floor, a few feet from the cage. Major settled at the entrance, a silent, watchful guardian. "So what happens if he doesn't eat?" Logan asked quietly, his gaze fixed on the trembling puppy. Elena glanced at the chart, her expression grave. "His blood sugar is bottoming out. He has absolutely no reserves, Logan. He was starving even before this happened. If we can't get calories in him within the next hour, his body is going to start feeding on its own muscle, just to keep his heart beating. He's going to go into organ failure." She hesitated for a moment, her eyes falling to the sterile tray beside her. On it rested a long, slender rubber tube. "I may have to insert a feeding tube," she said, her voice weighted with dread. "We guide it up through his nose and down into his stomach. It's how we'll have to force feed him." Logan's eyes locked on the tube. It looked like a serpent. It looked like torture. "No," Logan said, his voice quiet but absolute. Elena frowned. "Logan, I don't want to do this either. I know it's invasive. It's horribly uncomfortable. And with the trauma to his throat, it will be excruciating for him. But we're running out of options." "He's been kicked, tossed aside, cut open, and stitched back together." Logan said, his gaze fixed on Kaiser. "His first night alive was nothing but pain. We are not forcing the tube down his throat. Not yet." "We don't have time for not yet," Elena countered, the professional urgency rising in her voice. "He's fading, Logan. Give me the formula," Logan commanded quietly. He held out his hand. Elena hesitated, staring at the man's large, calloused hand. A hand that was trained to hold a rifle to dig a trench. A hand that had taken life, now reaching out to save one. She gave him the bowl of formula. "You have 10 minutes, she warned, her voice barely a whisper. "After that, I have to use the tube." Logan simply nodded. He shifted his weight. He closed the distance inch by painful inch, settling beside the cage, his gaze carefully averted. A direct stare was a threat, a challenge he refused to make. He made himself small, a gentle giant, focusing on his knees, a deliberate act of surrender. "Hey, Emperor." Logan's voice was a soft whisper. It was a low rumble that vibrated deep in his chest, a sound of distant thunder muffled in velvet. "I know it hurts. I know everything is pain right now." Kaiser's eyes were fixed on him, his tiny ears pinned flat against his skull. His small body was wound tight like a spring. His gaze locked on the man's hands. But Logan made no move toward him, no gesture with the bowl. Instead, he slowly dipped his finger into the warm, white milk, coating his skin in the sweet-smelling liquid. That finger was a testament to his life, scarred from battle and hard labor, its skin as weathered and tough as old leather. The hand of a warrior now offering the tenderness of a mother. Agonizingly, impossibly slowly, Logan reached out. He didn't invade the puppy's space, stopping a crucial 6 inches away, holding his position in the delicate balance between terror and starvation. "It's just milk," Logan breathed a sacred promise. Not a boot, not a fist, just life. Kaiser's gaze was locked on that one finger. A single drop of milk swelled at the tip, glistening heavy like a white pearl before letting go, and landing with a soft sound on the towel. The scent, vanilla, richness, warmth reached him. Kaiser's nose twitched, his primal hunger roaring to life. It was a war cry against his terror. He dared to stretch his neck forward an inch, then recoiled, flinching from a blow that never came. "I'm right here," Logan vowed, his voice a steady anchor. "I'm not moving. Major's on guard. You're safe." From the doorway, Major gave a low woof. A soldier confirming his post was secure. Bolstered by his pack, and driven by the gnawing fire in his belly, Kaiser risked it again. He stretched his neck out, his tiny whiskers trembling with the effort. He took in the scent of Logan's finger. Not the cold smell of a clinic, but the smell of the man himself, tobacco, an old truck, and the honest sweat of his rescue. He smelled the one thing in his universe that meant safety, and then Kaiser's tongue. Impossibly small and pink, darted out and touched his rough skin. The connection was electric. A current shot up Logan's arm and seized his heart, bypassing all thought. It was a bond forged deeper than any handshake, more intimate than any spoken word. It was the purest form of trust. Kaiser tasted the milk, then froze, bracing for the pain. A wince confirmed it hurt to swallow, but Logan saw something else, the taste. That taste was a triumph. Lap, lap, lap. That's it, asterisk. Logan breathed, dipping his finger once more. That's my good boy. And with that, Kaiser shuffled closer. The dam of his fear finally broke. He began to lick with a desperate urgency, cleaning every last drop from Logan's finger, his tongue a rough, warm texture against his skin. Logan dipped and offered a steady, life-giving rhythm. In the doorway, Elena watched, her arms folded a silent witness. She only realized she was holding her breath when her lungs started to burn. She watched this powerful Marine, a man who looked as if he could shatter brick walls, now curled up on the cold floor, feeding a fragile life drop by precious drop with the tenderness of a saint. Silently, she picked up the feeding tube and let it fall into the trash. "He's eating," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. But Logan never broke his focus. He was in their world now. Kaiser had crept from the corner and was resting his small chin on Logan's knee. Lapping the milk from the bowl, Logan angled just for him. His frail tail, a once lifeless thing, offered a single hesitant sway. It was the smallest motion, but in the clinic's silence it felt as profound as the world turning on its axis. Outside, the winter lingered cold and unforgiving, but in here a fragile spring had just begun with that drop of milk. Their return to the cabin was no victory parade. It was a slow, deliberate retreat to the safety of high ground. Logan's truck crunched up the gravel path, its tires compressing fresh snow into stark white ribbons of ice. The cabin, a small haven of cedar and stone tucked against the tree line, stood like a lighthouse in a vast sea of pines. Its chimney exhaled a constant plume of gray smoke into the winter sky. Inside, the air was rich with pine resin and wood stove ash, the very scent of sanctuary. Logan carried Kaiser inside. The pup was no longer that deathly pale specter from the clinic, but he was a long way from whole. His hind legs dangled uselessly, swinging to the rhythm of Logan's steps like pendulums of dead weight. The swelling around his spine had receded, but the nerves lay silent, lost in a darkness that Dr. Ross prayed was only temporary. "Welcome to the barracks," Logan whispered, setting the pup down on a thick nest of blankets he'd made by the hearth. Kaiser landed gently. Instantly, he tried to stand, his front paws scrabbling for a grip on the hardwood, his claws clicking with sheer determination. He strained to heave his chest up, his eyes bright with the urge to explore, but his back half would not follow. It remained grounded, an anchor he could not lift. Kaiser paused, glancing back at his own legs with a confusion that was achingly human. He let out a soft whine, a high, sharp cry of pure frustration, and tried once more. He dragged himself forward 2 inches, his rear legs trailing uselessly behind him like broken wings. "Easy, soldier," Logan said, kneeling by his side. "We don't leave anyone behind, but we don't sprint on broken legs either." Major, who followed them inside, with a quiet and solemn gravity, walked over to the warm nest. He didn't sniff Kaiser this time. He just stood over him, staring down at the lifeless legs. Then, with a heavy sigh that seemed to rattle his own ribs, Major lay down. He positioned himself perfectly so his broad, warm back was pressed firmly to Kaiser's paralyzed flank. He became a living support, a silent wall that said, "You don't have to stand up to be strong." Life in the cabin soon found a new demanding rhythm. It was a new routine of care, demanding more patience than Logan knew he had. The greatest challenge wasn't the food. Kaiser ate now, attacking his bowl with a chaotic, joyful energy. The problem was movement. A dog that can't walk can't do his business outside, and a dog that fouls its den loses all dignity. Logan got creative. He found an old, thick beach towel faded to the pale blue color of a summer sky. He rolled it lengthwise, forming a wide and soft strap. "All right, let's get you rigged up," Logan said, sliding the soft towel under Kaiser's belly just before his paralyzed hips. He lifted both ends of the towel like the handles on a grocery bag. Kaiser's entire back end rose from the floor, suspended inside the sling. The puppy glanced back, startled, then realized his feet were hovering. "Forward march," Logan commanded gently. It was a clumsy, halting shuffle. "Dance," Kaiser pulled with his front legs, and Logan walked just behind him, shouldering the weight of his hindquarters. United, they became a 6-legged creature, stepping awkwardly out into the snow. It was grueling work. Logan's back ached from bending over. Kaiser, in his helplessness, frequently grew frustrated, lashing out at the towel, yet they pushed on. Morning, noon, and night they trudged through the snow, etching a bizarre trail behind them. A set of 2 boot prints, 2 paw prints, and the furrowed line of a life fighting to heal. Back inside the cabin, Major took his post. The old German shepherd assumed the role of head nurse, watching over Kaiser with a fierce intensity that was almost obsessive. When the draft from under the door sent a chill across the floor, Major would rise and without hesitation walk over and lay down between the door and the puppy, shielding him from the wind with his own body. One afternoon, Kaiser awoke from a nap. Thirsty, he hauled himself over the blankets, panting, his eyes fixed on the water bowl 5 feet away. It might as well have been 5 long miles. His claws slipped on the wood floor. He released a sharp bark of frustration. Logan was in the kitchen washing the dishes. Before Logan could dry his hands, Major was already moving. The powerful dog strode to the water bowl and lowered his head, not for himself, but to shove. Using his strong nose like a shovel, he pushed the ceramic bowl straight across the floor. Water sloshed over the sides, drenching his paws, but he never faltered, not until the bowl bumped against the blankets right by Kaiser's nose. Kaiser drank greedily. Major then licked the spilled water from the floor quietly, cleaning the entire mess. Then he sat and looked at Logan, his gaze saying it all. "I have the new guy. Go finish the dishes." Logan couldn't help but smile, a true smile that crinkled the corners of his weary eyes. "Good work, Major. You're a better medic than half the corpsmen I knew." But the nights were harder. The nights were when the demons always came out. It was 3 in the morning on the 4th night. The fire in the stove was now just dying embers, painting the room in a faint, pulsing orange glow. Outside, the wind began to howl again, rattling the window panes like an intruder testing the locks. Nearby, Logan was fast asleep on the sofa. He had moved there to be closer to the dogs when the sound shattered his sleep. It was no bark. It was a scream. Kaiser was thrashing in his bed. His front legs were churning in the air, desperately fighting an unseen enemy. His eyes were clamped shut in terror. His lips pulled back in a silent snarl of sheer terror. In his mind, the boot was coming down again. In his dream, he was falling. No. In an instant, Logan was off the couch on his knees by the blankets. "Kaiser, wake up. It's just a dream." But Major was already there, whining softly, trying to lick the puppy's face, but Kaiser was trapped too deep within his own nightmare. He kicked out violently with his front paws, scratching Major's nose and snapping at shadows. And that's when his body betrayed him. The paralysis in his back legs meant he had no control of his bladder. In the absolute panic of his nightmare, his muscles gave way. A dark, warm stain spread rapidly across the blankets, immediately soaking into Kaiser's fur, its sharp, acrid smell filling the small room. Kaiser awoke with a jolt. He froze, the nightmare fading, replaced by a new, crushing reality. He smelled the urine on himself. He felt the cold wetness. For a dog, especially a German shepherd, a breed built for pride and for cleanliness, this was the ultimate shame. Kaiser refused to look at Logan. He refused to look at Major. He dragged himself backward, away from the wetness, curling into the tightest ball he could manage in the corner of the room. He pressed his head low, his chin scraping the cold floorboards. His ears vanished, plastered so tightly against his skull, they were nearly invisible. A tremor racked his body, born not of the chill but of pure shame. He braced himself for the roar. He braced himself for the blow. He was waiting for the kind of pain Silas always delivered. Logan's gaze fell on the puddle, then shifted to the small, quaking form huddled in the darkness. A memory surged through Logan's mind, not of the firefight, but of that sterile hospital room in Germany right after the IED. He remembered the raw helplessness of waking up paralyzed, knowing the nurses were cleaning him because his own body had betrayed him. He recalled the searing heat of a shame that cut deeper than any shrapnel. He remained utterly silent. Logan rose and moved to the closet. He retrieved clean bedding, a bucket of warm water, and a cloth. Then he knelt. He kept his eyes from Kaiser for the moment. He just cleaned the floor, erasing the mistake with calm, methodical strokes. He gathered the soiled blankets, setting them by the door for later. In their place, he laid down a fresh, dry fleece, soft and inviting. Only then did his gaze fall upon the corner. Kaiser recoiled as Logan drew near. The pup squeezed his eyes shut, preparing for a strike that was sure to come. Logan lowered his own body to the floor. He refused to loom over the dog. He made himself small, meeting the terrified creature on its own level. He edged across the wooden planks until he was lying beside Kaiser. "Hey," Logan breathed, his voice a mere whisper. Kaiser cracked open a single eye, a sliver of white betraying his terror. Logan extended a hand, but not to pat his head. Instead, he placed his hand firmly on Kaiser's shoulder, a steady, grounding weight. "You listen to me," Logan said gently. This is nothing. You think you're the first soldier to lose it in the dark. I've seen hardened Marines, tough guys, the kind you don't mess with, do the same when the mortars began to fall. Hell, I've been there myself." Kaiser's ears flickered. The voice held no anger. It was a shared secret. Logan shifted his hand, rubbing the puppy's chest, completely ignoring the faint, unpleasant odor, ignoring the dampness in the fur as he drew the puppy closer. "It's just your body, Kaiser. It's not your soul. You're hurt. You're healing. And in this home, we don't punish our wounded. We get them cleaned up and we carry on." He gathered the small dog into his arms, not caring that the mess soaked into his own shirt, and set him down on the clean, dry bedding. "A clean slate," Logan declared. He settled back onto the rug beside the little nest, pulling a pillow down from the couch. "I'm not going anywhere. If the nightmares return, you fight them. And if you can't, I will." Major, who had been observing from the darkness, padded over. He inspected the clean blankets with a sniff, then turned his nose to Kaiser. He gave the pup a swift, rough lick on the ear, a clear message. "You're one of us. Now stop it." Then he flopped down, guarding the other side. Now protected between the soldier and the old wolf, Kaiser released a long, trembling sigh. The humiliation simply melted away, incinerated by the comforting warmth of the bodies surrounding him. He laid his head on the blanket's edge, his eyes fixed on Logan. Logan gave him a slow wink. Kaiser allowed his eyes to close. The scent of pine and wood smoke filled his senses again, overpowering the lingering odor of his mistake. He was no longer some broken thing. He was just a puppy safe in his den, watched over by guardians who accepted him, flaws and all. February in Duluth is a month of false promises. It is a time when the frozen fist of winter finally begins to unclench, not in a clean surrender, but in a chaotic weeping thaw. The massive drifts of snow that had entombed Logan's cabin at last began to retreat, exposing bare patches of earth rich with the scent of damp pine and a slumbering promise. The icicles that gripped the eaves, once like daggers, now wept a steady, rhythmic cadence onto the porch railing, marking the slow, deliberate arrival of spring. Within the cabin's walls, a more profound thaw was unfolding, one measured in inches of sinew and the faintest degrees of movement. The living room had been remade a sacred space for rehabilitation. Each night, the fire stoked and glowing Logan sat on the floor, cradling Kaiser's head. The pup, now growing lanky and awkward with youth, would gnaw contentedly on a toy as Logan worked. Range of motion. Logan murmured the phrase, a prayer he'd learned from Doctor. Elena Ross had taught him. Extend, hold, flex, hold. His large hand scarred and calloused from years gripping a rifle, now moved with a watchmaker's precision. He gently massaged the withered muscles of Kaiser's hind legs, willing life back into sleeping nerves. The work was slow, agonizing. Sometimes Kaiser would let out a small whimper, a quiet sound deep in his throat, trying to pull away. "I know," Logan soothed, never stopping. "I know it burns. But pain is just weakness leaving the body. You know who taught me that a drill sergeant whose voice could cut steel? He was right then, and he's right now." From the sofa, a recently claimed throne major watched over their ritual. He observed with the keen eye of a veteran, sometimes letting out a low groan if he thought Logan was pushing the young pup too far. The fortress of Logan's solitude had been breached not just by his dogs, but by the steady presence of Doctor Elena Ross, who had begun making house calls to the remote cabin. Her reason was to spare Kaiser the stress of travel, but Logan suspected she also came because her clinic was empty, and his cabin finally was not. One Tuesday afternoon, the air hung heavy with fog, filled with the steady, dripping sound of melting snow. Elena sat at Logan's worn kitchen table, cradling a warm mug of coffee. At her feet, Kaiser lay fast asleep, his back legs twitching in a dream. "His reflexes are returning," Elena said, her gaze fixed on the sleeping form. "I felt a real pain response today from his toe. The wiring is reconnecting, Logan. It's happening. Slowly, but it's happening." Logan leaned against the counter, his arms folded. He was not the same desperate man who had burst into her clinic weeks before. The ghost in his eyes had retreated, replaced by a quiet, unwavering resolve. "He still drags them, though," Logan said, the old despair gone from his voice. "He wants to run, Elena. It's all he thinks about. I can see it. He watches Major chase squirrels and he just shakes." "He will run," Elena said, her voice absolute and firm. Her gaze met Logan's, and the space between them filled with a quiet warmth that had nothing to do with the nearby wood stove. "You're working a miracle here, Logan. Most people would have given up, would have listened to the odds and walked away." "I don't listen to odds," Logan said simply. "I know." A smile from Elena lit up the dim room. "You're stubborn. A good quality. For a soldier and for a dog owner." As she stood to leave, Logan walked with her to the door. She paused while pulling on her coat. "You know you're healing too." Logan stiffened just slightly. "I'm fine." "I don't mean a physical wound," Elena said gently. She reached out her hand, hovering for a breath before softly touching his forearm. "When you first walked through that door, it was like you were carrying the weight of the entire world. But now you just look like a man carrying a dog. It suits you better." She was gone before he could answer, leaving Logan rooted to the doorway, his eyes tracing her taillights as they vanished into the fog. He felt a strange flutter in his chest that scared him more than any enemy soldier. The next morning brought a completely different kind of awakening. Logan awoke to the scent of coffee and an unnerving silence. Far too much silence. He sat bolt upright, swinging his legs over the side of the bed to reach for his boots. He found the left one, but the right one was gone. "Major," Logan called out, walking into the living room. Major was sleeping soundly on the rug, but in the corner by the woodpile was Kaiser. The little pup was completely absorbed in a project. He had Logan's heavy leather combat boot pinned between his front paws, chewing on its heel with an expression of pure, unfiltered joy. The laces were utterly destroyed. The rugged leather heel was pierced with a dozen tiny teeth marks. "Hey!" Logan yelled. Kaiser went rigid, looking up with the boot hanging from his jaw. For a moment his eyes went wide and his ears flattened in guilt. But as Logan drew closer, Kaiser's tail gave a hopeful little thump. He didn't let go of the boot. A playful growl rumbled deep in his chest and he shook the boot like it was a hard-won prize. Logan stopped dead. He stared at the ruined boot, one that had crossed deserts and mountains with him. He knew he should be angry. A month ago, this chaos would have infuriated him. But today, Logan started to laugh. It was a rough, rusty sound at first, but it swelled until it filled the entire cabin. "You little rascal!" Logan chuckled, sinking to his knees. "You little vandal." He took hold of the other end of the boot. "You think you can get away with my gear? You think you're big enough?" Kaiser's eyes glinted with mischief. He tugged back with all his might. He was playing. The same dog that had been too broken to eat, too ashamed to meet his gaze, was now stealing his boot and demanding a game of tug-of-war. "That's it," Logan whispered, easing his grip to let the puppy win. "That's the spirit? You are not a victim anymore. Are you? You're a little troublemaker." The great thaw continued, transforming the world into a treacherous landscape of ice veiled by shallow pools of water. The driveway was a solid sheet of glass. That evening, Logan decided to take the dogs out one last time before bed. The sun had vanished, and the temperature was dropping fast, freezing the day's slush back into unforgiving ice. "Easy now," Logan cautioned, stepping off the porch. He had Kaiser in the towel sling, supporting the puppy's hind legs, while Kaiser navigated the steps with his front paws. Major trotted confidently ahead, as sure-footed as a mountain goat. Once they reached the flat part of the yard, Logan eased his grip just a little, letting Kaiser sniff at a bare patch of grass. "All right, buddy, do your business," Logan said, shifting his own weight. It happened in an instant. Logan's boot found a patch of black ice hidden beneath a thin film of water. His feet didn't just slip, they were violently swept out from under him. Gravity took hold with brutal speed. Logan slammed down hard onto his back, the air driven from his lungs in a desperate gasp. His head cracked against the frozen earth, and stars burst behind his eyes. His world spun as darkness closed in on his vision. He lay there stunned, gasping for each and every breath. Pain exploded from his lower back and skull. Logan groaned, squeezing his eyes shut as he lay still, desperately trying to assess his injuries, his body momentarily paralyzed by the shock of the fall. To his left, the towel sling lay starkly empty on the snow. Logan's grip had failed him as he fell. Kaiser had crumbled the moment his support disappeared. He now lay flat on his belly in the snow, just 5 feet away. But then Kaiser heard the groan. He saw his person, his pack leader, his entire world lying there, lying motionless on the ice. A primal electric panic surged through the German shepherd. The puppy didn't think. He forgot all his therapy. He didn't weigh the odds. He only knew the center of his universe had just collapsed. Kaiser fought to move. He clawed desperately at the ice, pulling his heavy frame forward. A desperate whine escaped him, a high-pitched cry that screamed, "Get up!" But pulling himself was too slow. The man remained still. Something ancient ignited deep inside Kaiser's mind. It was the same spark that willed him to breathe in the truck. It was the primal will of the wolf. Kaiser stopped pulling. He dug his front paws in. He gritted his teeth, a low growl aimed at his own failing body. And then, he pushed. Muscles that had lain dormant for weeks suddenly ignited. Nerves torn apart by trauma fired a signal across the void. The command shot from his brain, down his spine, past the scarred tissue and slammed into his hind legs. Stand. Kaiser's back end wavered. It trembled violently, but it began to rise. An inch, then two. He swayed dizzy with the monumental effort. He took a single step. His back paw, once a dead weight, found its footing on the ice. Then the other. Logan's eyes blinked open slowly, the world slowly sharpening through a fog of pain. He felt a wet, warm tongue washing his cheek. He felt hot breath against his face. "Major, I'm okay," Logan managed to mumble, raising a hand to nudge the dog away. But his hand met not the thick, coarse fur of Major, but the soft down of a puppy. Logan went rigid. His hand stopped in midair as his eyes shot wide open. Looming over him, straddling his very chest, was Kaiser. The young dog was trembling, his hind legs shaking like leaves in a storm. His muscles were bunched and straining, but his feet, all four of them, were planted firmly on the frozen ground. He wasn't dragging, he wasn't crawling, he was standing. Kaiser gazed down at Logan, his eyes filled with a profound concern, panting from the sheer effort. He licked Logan's nose once more, then let out a single sharp bark. "I've got you." Logan just lay there on the ice, the bitter cold seeping into his coat, and felt hot tears finally escape from his eyes, carving warm rivers through the frost on his face. He forgot the pounding in his head. He forgot his aching back. "You're standing," Logan whispered, his voice cracking. "Kaiser, look at you. You're standing." Major emerged from the tree line, alerted by the sharp bark. He stopped a short distance away, taking in the scene. The old dog tilted his head, witnessing the puppy standing guard over his fallen man. Major didn't intervene. He just wagged his tail, a slow, steady rhythm beating against the frigid air. Then Kaiser's legs finally gave way, his strength exhausted, and he collapsed gently onto Logan's chest. But this was no defeat. It was the rest that follows a hard-won victory. Logan wrapped his arms around the dog, burying his face in his snowy fur, laughing and crying at the same time beneath the immense starry sky of Duth. The ice was unforgiving, the wind sharp and cold, but Logan Vance had never felt such profound warmth in his entire life. A promise had been fulfilled. The winter had finally ended. 2 years can alter the very face of a landscape. In Duth, the winter still came, with its familiar ferocity, burying the world under a silent white veil. But the cabin nestled at the edge of the pines held a new spirit. It was no longer a fortress of solitude built by a man running from his shadows. It had become a home. The late November rain fell in relentless sheets, a chilling, miserable downpour that transformed the gravel road into a thick slurry of gray mud. A Ford truck, newer than the old beater that once tore through a blizzard, pulled into the driveway. A door swung open, and a giant emerged. Kaiser was no longer the broken bundle of bones once cradled in a jacket. He was a magnificent German shepherd, a powerhouse of 90 pounds of solid, rippling muscle. His coat, a deep and lustrous black and tan, was a dense shield against the harshest elements. He moved with a liquid, predatory grace, his head held high, his ears swiveling, attuning to the soft rhythm of rain on pine needles. The only trace of the night that nearly claimed him was a faint, jagged line of white on his muzzle, a scar he wore like a medal of honor. He didn't bolt into the woods. Instead, he stopped at the porch steps and looked back, waiting. Slowly, carefully, Major navigated the steps. At 7 years old, he was entering the twilight of his prime. The silver on his muzzle had spread, blanketing his face like a delicate frost. His hips, once powerful springs, were now stiffened by arthritis. He moved with a quiet dignity, but his pace was slow, each step a careful negotiation with gravity. And Kaiser waited. He didn't whine. He didn't pace. He stood perfectly still, a silent sentinel, his golden eyes locked on his elder brother. The moment Major reached the bottom step, Kaiser lowered his head, giving the old dog a gentle nudge on the shoulder, a profound gesture of respect, a silent reassurance. "I'm here. I've got the watch." From the driver's seat, Logan Vance watched them, then stepped out into the rain. He smiled, a genuine warmth that reached his eyes and lingered. The harsh, chiseled lines of his face had softened. The tension that once coiled in his shoulders like a loaded spring had vanished. "Come on, boys," Logan called out, grabbing a bag of groceries from the back. "Let's get out of this soup." Inside the cabin was a welcoming sanctuary of warmth. A fire blazed in the hearth, its crackle a cheerful song. The aroma of rosemary and roasting chicken permeated the air, a scent that had never once graced Logan's solitary kitchen. Dr. Elena Ross was standing by the stove, stirring a pot of simmering soup. She wore one of Logan's flannel shirts over her jeans sleeves rolled to her elbows. She looked up as the trio entered, her face instantly lighting up. "You're all soaking wet," she laughed, setting the spoon aside to come to Logan. "It's a swimming pool out there," Logan replied, leaning in to kiss her forehead. He smelled of fresh rain and pine, a scent Elena now forever associated with safety. Logan knelt, grabbing the stack of towels kept by the door just for this ritual. He started with Major gently rubbing the old dog's stiff hips to warm his aching joints. Major leaned into this comforting touch, groaning with pure relief. Then Logan turned to Kaiser, who shook his massive frame, sending a shower of water across the room before burying his massive head deep into Logan's chest. "You're a beast. You know that," Logan murmured, burying his face in the dog's dense neck fur. A soft ruff in reply. Later that evening, after the dishes were done and the wind howled its mournful song around the eaves, the family settled together in the living room. Elena was lost in a medical journal on the sofa, her feet curled beneath her. In his armchair, Logan let a pencil drift across a sketchbook, a new habit he'd formed to quiet the noise in his head. Major slept soundly on the rug, twitching in dreams of rabbits he once chased. Beside him, Kaiser lay awake, his great head on his paws, his gaze fixed on the fire. Logan's eyes fell on them, all the woman he loved, his loyal old guardian, and the quiet survivor. His gaze drifted to the scar on his own hand, a memento from his time in Kandahar. Then his eyes settled on the silvered scar across Kaiser's nose. For years, Logan had viewed scars as just signs of being broken. He saw them as fractures where his own value had drained away. But looking at Kaiser, this impossibly powerful, noble creature once shattered and thrown away, Logan finally understood. Scars were not cracks in the armor. They were the places where life itself had tried to break you and failed. They were the very welding marks of a reforged soul. Kaiser wasn't strong despite his past. He was strong because he endured it and because he was loved back from it. "What are you thinking about?" Elena asked gently, setting down her journal. Logan met her eyes. "Just that we're a pretty good team. A pack of strays maybe, but a good one." Elena smiled. "The very best." The quiet moment was broken by a low, urgent sound. Woof! It wasn't Major. It was Kaiser. He stood at the front door, his entire body rigid with purpose. He wasn't growling with aggression. He was intensely alert, his tail held high and perfectly still. He looked back at Logan, then to the door. "Woof. What is it?"
"Boy upon bite,"
Logan asked, getting to his feet. Kaiser paced a tight, anxious circle, then pushed the doorknob with his nose. "He wants to go out," Logan said with a frown. "He just went." "Maybe he heard something," Elena offered. "Or maybe he just wants to check the perimeter. He takes his job to heart." Logan grabbed his coat and a flashlight. "All right, Emperor, let's go see what all the fuss is about." He pulled open the door. The rain had become a stinging sleet that bit at his skin. Kaiser didn't tear off into the yard. He bolted directly for the truck parked in the driveway. His barks were not for the woods. He was barking at the truck. Specifically, he was focused on the rear passenger side, right near the wheel well. He dropped to his front legs, whining, trying to jam his massive head into the space between the tire and the mud flap. Kaiser back, Logan commanded, worried a raccoon or a porcupine was cornered in there. Kaiser completely ignored the command. He looked at Logan, then back to the wheel, and let out a sound Logan hadn't heard in 2 long years. It was a high-pitched, desperate yelp. It was the sound of a creature crying out for help. Logan's heart hammered in his chest. He rushed forward, grabbing Kaiser's collar to pull him away, then aimed the flashlight's beam into the dark, muddy hollow of the wheel well. At first, he saw only mud and rusted steel. Then the beam caught a flicker of a reflection. 2 tiny, horrified eyes, as wide as buttons, stared back at him. Huddled on the spare tire, seeking the fading warmth from the exhaust pipe, was a tiny kitten. It was soaked through a little scrap of black and white fur that couldn't have been more than 6 weeks old. It was shivering so violently it seemed to shake the metal bracket it clung to. "Well, I'll be damned," Logan whispered. He remembered another night 2 years ago. A porch, a blizzard, a broken body lying helpless in the snow. "Elena," Logan yelled against the wind. "Bring a towel, a dry one." He dropped to his knees in the freezing mud, not caring about his clean jeans. He reached his hand into the confined space. "Easy now," Logan soothed his voice, dropping to that profound, reassuring rumble he reserved for the dogs. "I won't hurt you, come on." The kitten hissed a fragile, defiant sound and lashed out with a paw no bigger than a dime. "Yeah, you're a fighter," Logan smiled. "I like that, but you're freezing." He moved his hand slower, letting the kitten learn his scent, the smell of dog, of man, of warmth. He gently took the kitten by its scruff and drew it out. It was impossibly light, just a shivering handful of fur and bone. Logan rose, tucking the kitten inside his jacket against his chest, an instinctive gesture that felt like muscle memory. He strode back into the cabin, Kaiser trotting proudly beside him. "What is it?" Elena asked, rushing forward with the towel. Logan unzipped his jacket. The kitten blinked in the sudden firelight, looking like a small, sodden creature, shivering uncontrollably. "Found a stowaway," Logan murmured, settling down on the rug near the fire. He placed the kitten down. Major raised his head, sniffed the air, then huffed with disinterest before returning to his slumber. He had done his time with the little ones. This was someone else's watch. Kaiser stepped forward. The immense German shepherd lowered his head, his powerful jaws capable of crushing bone, his teeth white and sharp. The kitten froze, arching its back, terrified of the giant before it. But Kaiser didn't bite. He didn't bark. He simply extended his tongue and gave the kitten a long, thorough lick from its ears to its tail. The force of the gesture nearly knocked the kitten over. The kitten blinked, stunned, but then it felt the tongue warm and rough like a mother's. It relaxed. Kaiser lay down. He coiled his massive body around the kitten, forming a wall of fur between the tiny creature and the rest of the world. He gently nudged the kitten with his nose, urging it closer to his belly, closer to his warmth. Logan watched, and his vision blurred. It was the same scene, the same circle of life. 2 years ago, Major had done this for Kaiser, and now Kaiser was passing it on. The love hadn't ended. It had just changed vessels. The kitten, finally feeling safe, began to purr. A rusty rattling sound, faint yet defiant. Logan reached over and stroked Kaiser's powerful head. Then, with a single finger, he stroked the kitten's damp fur. "You picked a good home, kid," Logan whispered. Elena sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "What should we name him?" Logan gazed at the gray sky beyond the window, then at the warm fire, and finally at the small survivor nestled against the gentle giant. "Scout," Logan said, "because he was out there all alone searching for a way home." He looked up toward the ceiling, or perhaps through it to the winter sky over Duth. The storm still raged, but the cold could not reach them now. "Welcome to the team, Scout," Logan whispered. Kaiser sighed a sound of pure contentment and closed his eyes. The pack had grown. The circle was complete. And deep in the heart of winter, everything was finally perfectly warm. This story shows us that true strength isn't about avoiding pain. It's about how we rise after we've fallen. Logan thought he was saving a puppy, but in reality that puppy saved him. In our own lives, we can never know how one simple act of kindness might change a destiny forever. When we open our hearts to the lost and the broken, we are not just rescuing them. We are mending the pieces of our hearts we feared were broken forever. For love is a journey that always leads back home. If Kaiser's incredible journey moved your soul, honor his spirit by liking and sharing this story with those who know the miracle of rescue. Become a part of our family here. Subscribe so that you never miss a testament to hope and loyalty. Let us join in prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you for these faithful souls you send into our lives to show us the meaning of true unconditional love. Please watch over each soul in a shelter, dreaming of a family tonight. And bless all who hear this with the strength to be a beacon of hope in the storm. If this prayer finds a home in your heart, please share your amen with us. Below, amen.